Hey guys, LevelCap here. Today I want to talk about the FPS scene in PC gaming and how the landscape has been changing. The recent release of PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds has not only captured my full gaming attention, but it's also resurfaced some feelings I've had about the shooter industry over the past several years, and I'd like to talk about it today with you guys and see how the rest of the community is feeling. With that said, I think some of the great shooters that we've had are ones that have started off as mods to other shooter games. Counter-Strike is probably the most obvious example of this, but also Battlegrounds. It was initially a mod for Arma, and crazy fact, PlayerUnknown actually licensed his game mode to H1Z1 for King of the Hill. So the insanely successful mode for H1Z1 that allowed the game to succeed beyond all expectations was initially designed by PlayerUnknown. Mind blown, right? And now that he has made his own game where he is the creative director, you can really see the refinement of his original vision. I'll try not to gush too much about Battlegrounds, but it really is the inspiration for making this video and has drawn up all these feelings once again. I haven't had this much fun playing a shooter since maybe Battlefield 3, and even then I think I'd probably have to tip the scales towards Battlegrounds. Now, when I like to categorize my FPS shooters, I'd say that there are two AAA juggernauts in the FPS world. There's Call of Duty and Battlefield. Both of these game franchises have huge production budgets, massive marketing campaigns, and regularly scheduled releases. In fact, both games rely heavily on sequels to keep making money and keep their franchise alive. Each new title introduces new settings, features, and supposed improvements to the gameplay. Unlike Counter-Strike, these games attempt to reinvent the wheel with each new release. This can involve flashy new game modes, highly animated melee takedowns, level-wide destruction, and things that frankly look great from a marketing perspective. However, from a gameplay perspective, constantly changing things can ultimately steer a franchise away from what originally made them great. Despite improving sales figures, Battlefield 1 is losing my interest faster than any previous Battlefield title. And really, it's not just me, but the majority of people I've played Battlefield with over the years feel the same way. Unrewarding gunplay, grenade spam, poor game mode optimization, lack of progression system, we all seem to have the same complaints. In fact, I've had friends that I haven't played Battlefield with in years message me up on Skype and say, hey, I picked up Battlefield 1, I really don't like this at all, and they came from the Bad Company 2, Battlefield 3 days. The new game just doesn't relate to them anymore. And unfortunately, I don't have a whole lot of hope that things are gonna get better. It's the rate at which DICE is currently making changes. It feels like trying to steer the Titanic away from an iceberg, where the captain turns the wheel a little bit and says, is this enough? And then we all have to say, no, it's not even close. And then they turn the wheel a little more and say, well, is that enough? And again, it comes up so short that I feel we are guaranteed going to hit that iceberg, which in this analogy, I suppose means eventually a greatly diminished or vacant player base. I know we have talked about the fast diminishing player base of Battlefield before, but it's at an all-time low right now, barely pulling in double the PC player count of Battlefield 4, which at this point is over 3 years old. Don't worry, console players, you guys are still pulling in strong player numbers. Your title will probably be alive and kicking for quite some time, but the FPS competition on PC is fierce, and Battlefield 1 just isn't cutting it for many of us. We then have games like Battlegrounds, which has been in early access for 2 weeks and is already boasting player counts double of what Battlefield 1 has on PC. And unlike Battlefield, its player count is actually growing at launch. Funny enough, the quantity of content in Battlegrounds is a mere fraction of Battlefield 1. There's only one map, 19 guns in total, one game mode that can be played solo or with teams, and yet I've never wanted to play a game more than I want to play Battlegrounds right now. And I think a lot of it comes down to the concept of less really is more. I've often used the term game bloating to describe what's happening with Battlefield and COD, which is developers and marketers feeling that the longer they can make their feature list, the better the game will sell. Rather than focusing on optimizing and perfecting 1 or 2 game modes, we need 7 game modes, many of which can be further customized and changed, none of which play particularly well or are a good representation of skill and strategy. Counter-Strike focuses on 1 core game mode. Rainbow Six Siege has 1 core game mode. Battlegrounds has 1 core game mode. All of these titles have casual and competitive variations of these modes, but the rule set is largely the same, so graduating from casual to competitive really isn't a huge leap. These three competitive shooters are growing their player base post-launch, where COD and Battlefield lose players post-launch. Now, I'm not saying that Battlefield or COD should try and become competitive shooters or change the fundamentals of their gameplay, but they should try and learn some lessons from their competitors. The three FPSs I mentioned allow me to refine my gameplay and improve my skill drastically the more I play. Their core game modes represent the entire experience, and everything is designed and balanced around it. Gunplay is also central to each of these titles, which does sound like an obvious component of FPS games, but COD focuses on fast gun sprays or kill streaks, and Battlefield feels more oriented around grenades and other big exploding objects or behemoths that don't always add to the experience or improve the gunplay experience. Now, what strikes me as odd is that DICE has had many opportunities to realize some of the best aspects of Battlefield and refine them over the years, yet things have somehow managed to get worse. Bad Company 2 and Battlefield 3 were some of the biggest steps towards a Battlefield game that represented skill and strategy as priorities. The titles were far from perfect, but for some reason I thought Battlefield 4 would remedy the mistakes of Battlefield 3. Yet the game launched with its own problems, further complicated by poor map design, and completely missed the golden balance of small-scale vehicle versus infantry combat. Now Battlefield 1 comes along, turns all the weapon mechanics on their head, completely redesigns tanks and ruins the teamwork aspect, introduces grenade spam that gives me PTSD flashbacks of Battlefield 2 Karkand, and has introduced a new point gaining system that allows players to complete simplistic team-oriented goals in order to put themselves on top of the scoreboard, which takes away from the skill and promotes mediocrity in your playstyle. So many of the core mechanics that I enjoyed most about this franchise have really been changed with Battlefield 1 to the point where it's not really a game that represents what I like about Battlefield anymore. Now, I want to pump the brakes for a second and say that I understand my opinions don't represent the entire Battlefield community. With each major change the game makes, it pushes old players out and brings new players in. There's nothing wrong with enjoying the way that Battlefield 1 currently plays, but there is something to be said about changing the fundamentals of a game to the point where the player base that used to enjoy the game no longer finds those same enjoyable qualities. I often fought for change with Battlefield as it was the closest thing to my perfect first-person shooter game, but as I see it drifting further and further away from that goal, I find myself feeling a bit disenchanted. Maybe the next Battlefield game will really get things right, or maybe by some miracle Battlefield 1 will make the thousands of changes necessary to make it more enjoyable. But in the meantime, there are new shooters that are really capitalizing on my desire for a more skill-oriented tactical shooter. If DICE really wants to keep their core Battlefield experience intact, or at least appeal more to some of the veteran player base, it's important to recognize what people want. I sometimes see developers polling the community asking what we like so much about previous Battlefield games. What was it about the gunplay or the balance that was so much better? And on one hand, it is nice to see devs asking for direct feedback. But on the other hand, if the devs steering the ship have to ask the gamers which direction to turn, it doesn't really reflect upon the current understanding of Battlefield or why it's gone so far off course. They really need to start painting with broad strokes in their test environment. Too much of these minor patches are just chipping away at a very large problem. Anyway, there is something to be said about games with a core gameplay experience, something with a singular vision that's hard to lose sight of. Battlegrounds knows exactly what type of game it is, and even in its incredibly buggy and unpolished state, the design is still good enough to create an experience more enjoyable than a AAA shooter that's been out for over 6 months. If Battlefield ever gets the nerve to start trimming fat and reduce the game to its core essence, it will be much easier for them to understand their own product and why people enjoy it. So I think that kind of wraps it up for this video, but I would really like to hear your feedback. This is my opinion on Battlefield 1 right now. It's how I feel about the game, but how do you guys feel? If you're enjoying the game, let me know in the comments. What do you like most about it? If you're not enjoying the game, maybe you can let me know why. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. This is Level Cap, signing off.